Hello, everybody. Good evening. It's lovely to be in your company again today with a surprise guest who I only had the pleasure of meeting last Tuesday for the very, very first time. And I'm very, very excited that she agreed to be our guest for an extra session of the summer sessions. Hello, Anna Hickey-Moody. How are you?
Hi, yeah, good, thanks. Hello, everyone. It's great to begin conversations with you all, and yeah, really looking forward to chatting today.
So, Anna, for those who aren't in the know, you've got a very strong background in inclusive practice and inclusive arts, specifically inclusive dance, and also with a very, very strong look of academia and critical thinking around inclusive dance. So, take me back to the very, very beginning of how this journey all started for you in the first place.
Thanks, I will. And can I just say, if something doesn't if some of my framing doesn't make sense, people are welcome to ask questions or seek clarification. I did a performing arts degree at the University of Adelaide as a young person, and I had a major in theatre and I studied dance as part of that. And I had a sub major in anthropology. And I was really interested in new works, in works that weren't, dead white men stories, that were telling stories of new cultures and communities now. And I am the first person in my family that was born in Australia to an Irish father and an English mother. And so I grew up with this understanding of myself as part of the diaspora, but also the politics of that were kind of complicated, as you might imagine. And my dad was very, very unwell. So I cared for him for a lot of my childhood. It was quite difficult. And disability was very difficult to negotiate, to live with. Um, it was very painful. And I
Mm,
went to go and see the most amazing show when I was in about second or third year of my degree in our festival theatre in Adelaide that was, a full, amazing production values, inspiring, and it was kind of dark. It was called Djibouti Invaders of the Soul, and it was a Restless Dance company production.
mhm,
And they were wearing these huge gothic black ball gowns. The women and men were all wearing these black gothic ball gowns.
mhm.
And it was so powerful and yeah, mysterious. And it was, it wasn't about disability per se, but there
Yeah.
were dancers with cerebral palsies in wheelchairs and lots of dancers with Down syndrome, lots of different kinds of disability. And I cried and thought, really unusual to see a text that is about disability that is so complex, that
Yeah.
is, it's like high quality art. It's not sort of popular trash culture. It's not medical culture. It's its own thing. And so I went and auditioned for the company as soon as I saw. And so they were probably the key things. It was already going to appeal to me for the reasons that I've outlined to you. And I went and auditioned and then worked with the company for years, for 9 or 10 years, as a
Okay.
dancer, as a performer, but
Yeah.
also as a community workshop leader.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we toured like works across Australia. We made and performed a number of works. I mean, in the end, I ended up doing work choreographing with the company, and I sort of moved up in the company ecosystem. But I
Mm,
finally ended up doing a PhD, a research project around the politics of aesthetics and why I thought it was so important
mm.
for these kind of what I would call radical disability aesthetics that are really criticizing dominant ideals of disability through doing things otherwise. Why I
Yeah.
thought they were so important.
So I'm going to go back a tiny bit because you said a lot there now, and it all makes sense. So you're thinking around your dad and your dad's illness, and then about disability and the difficulty around disability and health and that kind of thinking, and then seeing Restless and doing and seeing that work for the first time. How did you how did you reconcile, I suppose, and shift that kind of thinking in your mind from, oh, maybe disability is difficult and challenging, and whatever, and putting a more positive, not positive, but having a more balanced guise on the situation.
Mm. Well, I feel like it wasn't even really me. It was
Mm,
just the company's work, and there was so much um it was so sort of carefully thought about, and it was so powerful.
mm,
Whereas I think, if you've been in institutional living facilities for extended periods of time, they can feel like there's not a lot of hope. And that's not a critique of the healthcare system per se. It's a
yeah,
critique of all kinds of things. It's a critique of the kinds of languages, what's thought about as being possible. It's, I feel like, and for someone with an interest in aesthetics, in around, even in terms of languages that are used and, how things are framed, I think that institutional living places can be really difficult spaces. So I think
absolutely.
that it was just such a contrast, and that there was so much that did not exist in the disability spaces that I spent a lot of time in otherwise.
Yeah,
And I knew in me how valuable that was.
yeah,
Like I don't have words for it, because it was something that was bigger than words. It was something that I thought, this is very unique,
yeah.
and I wanted to, help it happen, because it was so important.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, I've had a disability my whole life, and I've the lived experience of being in institutional settings like that from childhood, and then the other side of the coin then uh, of working in inclusive practice, but also still linking in with some of those institutions as well, and trying to marry the thinking of the two, that it's more empowering for everybody, and that the conversation,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, that it, oh, it needs to be. And I mean, and the old way, the old archaic way of thinking is being challenged on a daily basis, so I think that's very important. In terms of Restless, what were the highlights for you in terms of your
oh,
practice?
there were so many. And
Yeah.
two things that I just wanted to mention that I think really would stand out is there was so
Mm,
much sophistication and so much grace in their work. And I think they are two things that I hadn't seen outside the dance setting, really, in my disability work. So there was that was very they were very appealing. It was sophisticated, and there was a lot of grace in how things were done. So we did a tour to the Youth Dance Festival in about 97.
mm,
I'm showing my age here. And by this time I was a seasoned performer. And we actually there were two things. We ran workshops in schools and performed a work called Sex Juggling.
mm,
And we went right up the centre of Australia from Adelaide to Darwin. And so we performed in Cooper Pedy. Google Cooper Pedy. It's mainly all underground. It was amazing. And it was, Restless in a giant bus in the Red Centre. That was pretty wild. And we
yeah, yeah.
also we were part of the Paralympics opening ceremony, and we were part of the Paralympics Arts Festival program at the Seymour Centre in Sydney with a
Yeah.
show called The Days Allotted to Me. And that was a
Okay,
pretty
that's
big deal.
really weird. And you and I have not discussed this, but I was at the Paralympics in
Oh,
Sydney.
cool.
Not participating, but viewing it. So I actually think I saw you
Yeah,
perform.
right.
Yeah.
And I had red hair with a blunt fringe, and I had like a really funky kind of red. I was young and funky. So
Oh, but you're
yeah,
still funky.
great.
Now you're
Well,
still funky. That's weird. We had not discussed that. So yes, I did see you performing. I was
yeah.
incredible. I did see you perform. And
It
so
was a
that
great show, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And I think if you're going to do that, if you're going to do this work, and because I co-founded an inclusive dance company in Ireland in 2006 called Coughlan, the caliber of the work has to be really good,
It does, yeah.
really high. Otherwise, it can come across as tokenistic, or
I know.
all of those stupid buzzwords, and again, archaic thinking. So the standard has to be high, but you also have to have grace with it. You're right, so
Mm.
I think finding the right people and the right community is vitally important, vitally important. So, Restless was obviously really pivotal and a real turning point for you. Then talk to me then about, as you said a while ago, I hit upon a while ago, but I want to know the heart of why you did what you did. Then academia. Why then academia? If you were in the practice of everything and running community workshops and doing performance or whatever, what made you change vein and avenue into academia and write about that?
Look, I think it was a few things, and I
Mm,
know I was offered because the way in Australia we have like a year that's like an MA, but we'd call it our honours year. So you write your thesis, and then depending on your marks, you might get a PhD entry scholarship. And I was offered one of those, and I thought about it, and I thought, but really, where my heart is with this work with Restless. And I
mm,
thought maybe I can bring the two together
mm.
and try and study this. And that was a lot more complicated than I had anticipated. None of the disability studies people wanted to really support what I was doing because I was quite critical of some of the disability discourses. And even, even the other day, I think that there were some conversations happening where I would have been, I would have been critical of, for example, Wolfensberger's work
Mm,
because
mm.
I would say that there is so much more to people
Yeah,
than some of disability studies kind of presented what I thought was a bit of a shallow reading of the complexity of human life, and that
yeah,
actually dance cracks open a lot of quite narrow discourses
yeah,
and messes them up,
yeah,
especially integrated dance when we've got different kinds of vulnerabilities and capacities
yeah,
being melded together. So I really wanted to look at how this dance invited people to think and how that is different from medical discourses or existing sociological discourses.
yeah,
So it took me a while to find anyone that was brave enough to let me do that, I have to say. And
yeah.
then, yeah. And then
And
the
so,
thesis
and
was
so when you,
obviously.
and so when you did, and so
Mm.
when you did,
Well, then I then the PhD became a book, and then I became an academic, and life. But it was like my reviewers said this is paradigm shifting because I ended up working mainly with philosophers, and I did one chapter that's really critiquing medical discourses of disability for not for what they do in medicine, but for the fact that they are carried outside of medicine as
mm,
if, imagine taking a pirouette into all settings and saying, well, you must pirouette first. It's like pirouettes only really happen in a particular context. So it's a bit funny that medical discourses became the way of understanding particular people. Like they should stay quite, they sort of expand their boundaries without remit. And so
yes,
I was sort of arguing that we could take the politics of aesthetics as a new way of knowing. Because when you're watching something, you're feeling it. You're
yes,
going on the journey with them and you're feeling connected to performers in a way that, the words disability, what does that even mean? Whereas that might be broken apart in a performance and you might be invited to connect in a whole range of new ways and have feelings that don't exist in the written discourses about these bodies in
yeah, yeah,
inverted
yeah.
commas.
I think,
So,
I
mm,
think you hit upon a very valid point, just in terms of people, some people with disabilities are in a room for the first time working in inclusive practice wise. They may have never had this experience of being touched in a different type of way. It's always been in a medical way or a support way from a PA or a caregiver or some way more functional.
yeah.
And they're been given an opportunity to uh, to see their body in a different way, a new light, a new guise, and that's shape shifting in itself. And
Yeah,
then for somebody who doesn't have a disability, for to see their body in a new way, because they might have had past traumas from past dance experiences they've had from what they've been told to be that body perfect, there's a lot of trauma in the room. There's a lot of trauma in the room in lots of different ways. And so we're informing each other, no matter what way you're coming from, in many, many different ways in the room. And sometimes it's non-verbally, you know, because it's through movement and through and then of course through conversation, but usually through movement and dance and the exploration of that. So you writing about all of this and looking at from the medical and turning the medical kind of side on its head is nothing but empowering, really.
Mm.
you know so your talk to me more about your fantastic book, and why you decided to do that. Tell me more
Well,
about the thinking and the chapters and the research and all of that information.
I think so. The philosophers that I worked a lot
And I
with,
love the title, by the way, just to say, unimaginable bodies. I mean, it's a beautiful title.
I called it unimaginable bodies because I was very critical of this idea of disability.
Yeah.
But then, of course, it's so important because, if you can't stand up and, we need to make adjustments around things like what people do and don't do with their bodies.
Yeah.
We need to acknowledge the materialities of things. But
Mm,
I felt like the word disability wasn't the right word. But I also didn't want to not use the word disability because like my dad couldn't eat without being fed. He couldn't go to the toilet without being, like they're material things. You need to be there to lift someone. So it was really complicated, but I was never happy with the word disability. So unimaginable bodies was my way of saying that what I was talking about in the group body that you make when you're dancing as an ensemble with people with different abilities, you make a group body. You're all part of a connected body.
mm,
And we probably don't have words that explain that because the word disability stands in for so much. And
yeah,
yeah, anyway,
it's a
and we're
blanket
sort of,
word. Are you there,
yeah,
Anna?
yeah, I think so. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, yeah. It's a blanket terminology.
Mm. So I called the book Unimaginable Bodies, and yeah, so it's about there's a criticism of medical discourses, and then I talk a lot about the fact that making dance that is specific to the bodies of people who are considered as having a disability or being disabled, depending on the terminology,
Mm,
is it's an important process because it's about acknowledging sets of knowledge that are often not recorded. We were sort of gestured to this earlier about, histories of living within institutions or histories of being told certain ways of feeling about bodies, learning about your body in certain ways. How do we document these processes? And actually, dance is such a critical way because if your body is the vocabulary, if your movements that are specific to how you've grown and how you move, your body is telling that story. And so we're actually telling these stories that are so difficult to access because they're locked away too much. And now we're bringing them out and we're combining them together and sharing them. And I don't know, I think it's really powerful. I think that those knowledges are very unique and
yeah.
rare. So I
And
called,
and I think also you documenting things so beautifully is so important. I would love to have more people with disabilities documenting things themselves. That's again very, like, I mean, more people with different types of disabilities, should I say, whether they be physical or intellectual or neurodivergent or every which way. And I am using the word disability, so I think that's very, very important. But by having this documentation, it creates more conversation, and it creates debate, and it creates a different way of thinking and a more rooted way of thinking about things.
yeah, no, I agree. And I think hopefully it will encourage, I mean, it definitely was the first of then many books about this philosopher and how, because he's very interested, Deleuze, his name is Gilles Deleuze, he's French, but he's very interested in the politics of art and feelings
Mm.
and in what might be broadly considered outsiders. So he talks about the people to come. So he talks about sort of cultural outsiders and how they have an important contribution to make. And you can see how I kind of felt like inclusive dance is a bit culturally outside a lot of the dance world, even though Restless, have always been funded by the Australian Dance Council. They were, a professional dance company, but also are still were considered culturally outside the dance world in some ways.
And it's
So,
interesting because by omitting those groups who were
mm,
culturally on the edge or on the fringe, you're knocking out a very strong cohort of people and great conversation and great artistry and great expression. And by
and
not
wildness.
and wildness. And I mean,
And humor. And
yeah,
humor.
yeah,
You're
yeah, yeah,
losing so much, you're
yeah.
losing so much openness and wildness and humor and stuff that just makes you, enjoy
Human.
life.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
And so talk to me then a little bit, Anna, about why you feel then it's so important for university settings to be more inclusive of the arts, especially inclusive dance. Why do you feel it's so important? I mean, I know we're touching upon it and discussing
Yeah.
it more specifically.
Well, I think that like inclusive practices, which is a very, very broad term,
Mm,
but I
mm,
think they are like broadly speaking, a best practice model for doing anything, really. And universities are broadly not very inclusive places. I feel guilty saying that as, someone who's proud of my job and does my best. But I've had, large service roles in big universities around disability inclusion.
mm,
And I've been at the coalface of seeing what I think are systems that could be more inclusive. And so I am always trying to make things more inclusive. But one is often up against quite large barriers because of the way in which discourses of excellence have been configured,
yeah.
often are very exclusive in nature. And also just practical things like access on campus, like the difference between, something that meets a legal requirement for being accessible to actually the size of most wheelchair users' wheelchairs. They're not your funky little wheelchair, Rhona, your dance chair. Like
Yeah.
often, a distinguished guest speaker comes with a much larger buggy because they're not sort of up and about the whole time they're traveling around in a buggy.
Yeah.
So there are all kinds of ways where institutions can't see their own exclusive nature, or there's the florid competition for exclusiveness where people sort of
Mm.
talk about Oxford and Cambridge as if
It's only
they
for a
are.
certain type or elitist or it's a certain breed of person. And you're right. I think a lot of institutional settings can feel like, oh, well, we've put down a ramp or we've put in a disabled toilet or whatever. So therefore we're inclusive. And we'll talk about being inclusive in language, but we won't really put it into practice, not fully and not properly, not in a real meaningful way. Now, some are getting it right, or
Yeah.
some are doing better than others. Some are doing better than others. It's true, but I think it's a
And
conversation.
there are
Mm,
good changes. I think across the sector there are changes around inclusion. But I
yeah.
think one of the biggest things that universities can learn from inclusive dance as a practice is that can-do kind of attitude, is that most inclusive dance practitioners are open people that let go of their pain on some level and they get in there and have a go. And if we could see they figure out a way of making it work. And, Rhona took the cue early and I'm going with Rhona, or, this is okay. We don't normally do this duet on the floor, but we're doing the duet on the floor today. Like you've got to be ready to roll with the punches on some level. And stay positively engaged in challenging times. And
And
I don't know,
actually,
I think that's something that I love.
and actually, you hit a very fair point, right? Because people who have an impairment or a disability or a differently able body, because they've lived their life that way, they've had to be good at pivoting. They've had to be good at being super flexible and malleable and all of those things. And those qualities are brilliant in inclusive practice. They're brilliant as a thinking, as a mindset for everybody. So mindset is vitally important.
It's like a precious resource that inclusive dance has.
Mm,
This kind of open, and there is like I think a lot of people who are working in the inclusive dance space have had to negotiate all kinds of complexities around their own bodies or disability in different ways. And so it comes with a level of I'm not sure how to put words on it, but it is I feel like one of our biggest resources as a community is our attitude and our way of thinking and sort of problem solving and letting go of stuff and just moving on. Because
yeah.
I think that we all also have so many levels of like issue there are so many issues that are so profound. They're not like, they're really day-to-day big picture stuff. So we're really there for the joy where we can find it, you know?
Yeah, and I think then from an institution point of view, and if they want to be more, it stayed in the obvious, but if they want to be more inclusive of differently able bodies, the best source to go to is to the people themselves who have differently able bodies, because they already have those
Mm,
skill sets that are needed to be brought into institutional settings in the first place. The resilience, the flexibility, the mindset, the positivity, the pivoting over stuff that's challenging because they've faced it 1,000 times over and over and over and over again in a million different ways. In a million
mm.
different ways. Um, so your beautiful book, Unimaginable Bodies, which is uh is 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 kind of like one of the early books. I mean, you were saying that at the time when you brought out, which was around 2009, yourself and Adam Benjamin, I think, were only two of the people who had them. I think Petra had brought out maybe her book at the same time as well. Um, but I mean that's astonishing. Are you tell me more about your writings, and are you planning on doing more? Or tell me more about your articles. Why were those things so important?
I definitely I was the only sort of person in Australia that was writing in this space, but Petra's book had just come out a bit beforehand, her first book. I mean, she's so prolific and amazing. We've
Mm,
worked together a bit
mm,
and I love Petra's work. In fact, she was part of a summer school. She dropped in and gave a guest lecture in a summer school that I ran recently. It was fantastic.
mwah.
And yeah, we're actually going to look at building on some of the things that she was talking about because she's been working with technology a lot and doing sort of individual dance experiences with tech.
Right.
And we've just got funding to make a new tech lab at my work at Maynooth, so that will be great. And we're thinking that we can have like individual discos because Petra was talking about creating sort of inclusive online experiences for people in virtual reality.
Uh,
Um, so I have then a lot of my research projects building on from the PhD were taking sort of methods from inclusive dance practice into different art forms. So
mm,
a lot of my work has been in with visual methods, and my most recent large project was around collecting young people's experiences of religion from very diverse communities. And so secular and religious young people um, from communities that were called in policy terms super diverse.
uh,
So layers of immigration, and then looking at the young people's voices and a similar principle of what if you put the young people's experiences and their voices at the center? What does that do to the policy discourses of religion or the ideas of religious conflict that were part of policy settings and initiatives. So that research was undertaken in England and in Australia, at a time when Prevent in the UK had a huge amount of funding going into it,
Mm,
and Australia had similar sort of interventions happening around tension and religious tension. But the thing is, it's a similar kind of principle. And it's about the ways in which different community members like to speak, and that this was a project where movement wasn't really that applicable because some community members actually couldn't dance. That was sort of against their faith. But
okay,
and so the ways in which they moved their bodies and bodies were choreographed in space were quite specific.
right.
Um, but visual representations, patterns, colors, they were all available as options, and also talking about sort of sensory atmospheres. So
Mm,
I feel like my background in inclusive dance and my creative training has
mm,
shaped my research agendas in a whole range and my methods in a whole range of different ways. But they've been really diverse, they that and that you might not know from looking at it. Oh, she was a choreographer. But of course, I'm thinking about the praying body in space and the orientations of the body and how, moving towards Mecca can be thought of as a choreographic tool.
yeah.
It's.
And so then uh and then it all makes sense. It makes sense because it doesn't matter what group you're dealing with. You're dealing it from the heart, the soul, the mind, the way of thinking, how you are working in the space, how you're thinking, how we're communicating with each other, how we're talking to each other. What is the conversation and where can the conversation go?
That's it. And it is very much like, what is your language is part of it. Because I suppose I came to inclusive dance around people, like a lot of restless dancers would have Down syndrome. And
Yeah.
and dance is absolutely such an alive part of who they are, more so than words a lot of the time, because words might not be their jam, but dancing is, there's going to be all kinds of curiosity and intrigue and stuff happening in movement. And it's
Mm,
absolutely their language a lot of the time.
yeah.
And that's it though. Where is your language and what is it? And so for some people, yeah, it might be words or it might be sort of visual medias. And so I do think there is a question there of how people express themselves and what registers are the most comfortable. And I think the body and disability, it's so important in a lot of ways. Um, Even, I'm neurodivergent and I feel like the way in which I express myself is very typically neurodivergent. And but I feel like movement and coming together with people, I don't know, I feel like I definitely connect to a lot of the sort of ensemble processes. I don't know whether it relates to that or not, but it has sort of always slotted in and been part of how I do things.
Yeah, and that's interesting now because I agree with you about that. And thank you for sharing that, by the way. Because I think for me, working as an ensemble piece and the more diverse people I can work with, the more
Mm,
interesting it is to me. I learn more, I create more, I think differently through whether it be through the movement or through the conversation or whatever's happening. But I like to work
mm,
in a way that is an ensemble and you never know who's going to say what next and how that's going to hit off you and what ripple effect that's going to cause. When we met each
mm.
other last Tuesday for the first time, which was incredible, um, we had some great conversations and we were up in UL. You gave a beautiful talk in UL and I ran a workshop. And it was an incredible day and so important for inclusive dance practice moving forward. What do you feel? Just getting back to universities, Anna. What do you feel that universities do well around inclusive work, and what do you feel they can learn more about? I don't want us to be negative and say what they're doing badly because I think everybody's trying and
I
they're
agree.
yeah, I think everybody's trying. I
Mm.
think everybody doesn't always get it right, but I want to know your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, look, I think I'm lucky at Maynooth in that we have an amazing vice president for equality and diversity.
Yeah.
And her name's Gemma Irvine, and she is really switched on. So she's done a lot of work around inclusion, broadly speaking, which includes disability, but is also more than that. It includes things like gender balances, which have been a real issue in Irish universities,
Yeah.
and that's slowly starting to change slowly.
Mm.
And yeah, Gemma is amazing, and so she also does a lot of work with scholars at risk and trying to create safe spaces for marginalized and threatened community members. And it's been the first workplace where I've been able to kind of say, look, I'm neurodivergent I I am very like I'm chatty. I'm often, my school reports from the age dot say Anna must stop interrupting people. And I have from the age of dot said, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I just get really excited. And that, you've got to take that as a win. Like I've been an academic for a long time now, and it would always be something that would be a source of great anxiety because sure, I love writing, obviously. I've written 8 books and I love focusing on details and writing books, but I'm also very anxious about, fitting in with the work culture. And so the fact that I felt with Gemma's support that I can kind of say, oh, I'm neurodivergent and actually I'm supposed to be allowed accommodations for my work.
Mm.
And that's a really big thing
Yeah. And
in
it's really
terms of
empowering. Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So she's really created a kind of institutional change that I haven't experienced at the other universities I've worked at in England and in Australia. And they are, big unis. So yeah, so fair play to her. She's amazing. And I think that's something that Maynooth does really well. I think that Maynooth, broadly speaking, are really good in terms of inclusion and access. They've got a new nursing program that's starting up. And so while they don't teach disability studies per se, they do teach youth work and they are now teaching nursing. And there are a lot of performance people dotted into arts and humanities in different ways, in music, in
Mm.
theatre,
Mm.
here and there. And I feel like there have been different moments before my time when there was a push to do more performing arts there. And of course, I'd like to see that happen one day. But I definitely think, yeah, there are there's a real sort of institutional investment in inclusion, which is pretty special, especially in contemporary times.
Yeah. 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 In 2025, we all need to be getting the memo, I feel, for inclusion and for everybody, all different marginalized groups. And I really feel that the source is to speaking to those in the know, and informing
Yeah,
yourself as an institution. And if you're not getting it completely right, fine, but then inform yourself about what you could be doing better.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's
yeah,
really, really,
I
really
agree.
important. Yeah. Um, just in terms of my work, and naming things and saying what you need, I finally found my tribe in my work and in the university settings that I've been in to kind of go, well, this is actually what I need, and I'm okay about saying it, and I can name it, and I say it unapologetically, and I'm not going to be made feel bad about it. But I think it takes time to grow into that as a human. That doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I really agree.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose practice makes perfect. I mean, I work at Dance Cork, Firk and Crane, and I've been linked with other institutions. Very excited about potentially doing some work with you well. And
Mm.
I think that people are really want to inform themselves and are really thirsty for change.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
agree.
yeah, I think the old ways are not really going to cut the mustard anymore. People want something that's new and new to them and challenging thinking and moving things forward.
Mm.
And kind of like they want to have that experience that you had when you went to see Restless. and the first time you auditioned and you just thought it was wow, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I also feel a bit like Ireland has a real opportunity in that the there is such a sort of an atrophy of possibility in some places, namely America, and even sort of what's happening in England. There's a real tightening of what's available. And I'm hoping that we can keep the space here in Ireland, for inclusive dance. I want to see your, dance degree in inclusive practice. I think if we can all keep flying the flag, everyone can come and huddle on our rock.
Yeah, and we can all dance together, huddled on that rock,
Mm,
and
hmm
I think you're right. I think it's about the keeping the conversation going, alive, real, and lived, and it's ongoing all of the time. And we're always constantly informing each other. When I get into a space,
mm.
a dance space with students, and I've done the program, I'm learning all the time. I'm learning all the time. Everyone
Yeah,
in the room is learning all of the time in a million different ways. So I think that's it's important to know that you don't know it all. You're always learning. Um,
yeah.
and I think
Agree.
that's what were you going to say, Anna?
Oh no, I was only agree. I was just
Yeah,
saying I agree.
yeah, and you're learning all the time, and I think it's kind of become a phrase of mine. I think it's important to find your tribe, that it's you want to be around people that you're aligned with, but
Mm,
also you want to support people who mightn't necessarily be in the know, and
mm,
create opportunities for them as well
mm,
to feel free to ask the questions that they want to ask and
mm,
inform themselves more. And I think that that's great. And I'm
mm,
all for that. I'm all for a curious mind and cultivating great conversation, uh,
hmm.
so everybody can move forward and be involved in inclusive practice. Um, what now? What are you up to now? So, what are the next steps for you, Anna? I
Well,
know I've no doubt you're up to 50 million different cool things.
I think I've got two books that are almost finished that I've got to push over the line. I've got to
Okay.
try. I run a research centre, the Arts and Humanities Institute, which is a really great job to have.
Uh-huh.
But a lot of what I do is sort of around organizing things and trying to feed back on people's work, and I do a lot of, I suppose, caretaking and organizing.
Mm,
So I want to find um, a little bit more time for my own research. And I do wonder whether I will get to have a strong performance aspect to my work again. And I have this fanciful idea that it will find me. If that, so the thing is that in Australia, when I was doing my PhD, like they closed my department, all the performing arts except music, the music was kept, but dance, theatre, and film was shut down.
oh,
And and so there was no possibility to do a PhD there in those spaces at that time.
mm,
And really, across my career, there's been very little opportunity in performing arts spaces because they're so um, under-resourced, and I suppose it's hyper competitive. And so if you wanted to have a job, you needed to have dexterity and be able to transfer your skills across different disciplines. And I've always kind of thought, well, look, if it happens, it happens. But I'm not going to, So I do hope that I've been working on this bog somatics practice, and I'm writing a chapter at the moment on bog somatics and the future of dance education in Ireland. And so I'm writing about this kind of, yeah. So look, I still have um my own sort of movement practice and ideas about that,
yeah.
but when I get a big funded project on it is for the gods to decide. But I would like to one day.
Excellent. I have absolutely no doubt. Like, just listen, and I don't normally use this word. Actually, it's not a word I use throw around so easy because I feel sometimes it's thrown around quite a lot. But I find you talking and listening to you speaking is really inspiring.
Thank you.
Always, you know,
Thank
and we only met each other last week, and I from the minute I heard you speaking at our day last Tuesday up in Limerick, um, it was a no-brainer to me to have you as a guest on the show. So I've absolutely, or in the summer sessions, but I've absolutely no doubt in my mind you will make happen whatever you want to happen, and the gods will just be smiling at you and create opportunity for you. So I'm excited about to see what you get up to next. So yeah, and I'm going to
you.
open up the questions. Thank you. I'm going to open up questions to our lovely people watching here and see if they have any questions for you. So.